All right, let's go ahead and move on then to section 5, which is dynamic user interfaces and VI server. Specifically, we'll first start talking about property nodes. Now, has anybody, some of you have used LabVIEW before, so has anybody used property nodes?
No.
No users? Okay. Well, we have already edited objects, or we have edited properties of objects up to this point. Now, can anybody think of some properties of some front panel controls that we've been manipulating?
Didn't we change the position of one of the controls?
Right, changing position is definitely a property of an object, in this case a control or an indicator. What else? Anything else?
Oh, didn't we change the color?
We changed the color, right? So you got the idea. Color, size, position. We've also, if you recall, in one of the previous exercises, we changed what you could put into a numeric, for instance, right? We went to a certain point and you couldn't go beyond that point. So I could enter in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but couldn't go beyond that. So that was what we call the data entry maximum. We couldn't put any more into that. So let's first review how we would do that again in edit mode, and then we're going to go to runtime where we can programmatically change that on the fly. So let's do that. So we'll go to LabVIEW, and I have my front panel block diagram. I'm just going to tile them side by side. And first I'll put down a numeric control. There we are. And as you can imagine, we can go up to any number or just type in some numbers. But I can right click on it and I can, in edit mode, change these properties. So I'll go to Properties. This brings up the Properties dialog box. And then we'll go to Data Entry. And you see by default, we have these use default limits, which are negative and positive infinity. I'm going to uncheck that. And I'm just going to go to the maximum. I'll put in 10. And if I put in a value over 10, I'm going to coerce it back to 10. OK. Yes?
The negative and positive infinity, does that mean we can put in any number? Or are there limits somehow that we have in LabVIEW?
Good question. Well, any number, it really depends on the data type that I'm putting it into. For instance, this is a double numeric and it has a certain amount of precision to it, a certain amount of memory, so 64 bits. So I can put in a number that 64 bits could take. It's a float, so it's a fractional number, so there are limits to that. And in fact, the context help would be able to tell me what the maximum and minimum that I could effectively store in that numeric would be.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Good question. All right. So now that I've manipulated that, let's see that I can reduce that number to 5 and then try to go beyond 10, and I can't. And in fact, if I go and put in an 88, it goes back to 10. Okay, we have edited the property of the object in edit mode. Now, what if we wanted to do this dynamically on the fly during runtime? Okay, that is the whole point of a property node. So I'm going to, in order to create a property node, right-click on the object, create property node. It's been there the whole time. And I'll look now at all these properties that I can edit about this object. In this case, what we want is the data entry limit right here, and I'm going to be choosing the maximum. So I click on that, and now I'm holding this property node. I'll put it on the block diagram. And then we can see right now that this arrow is going out of the property node, which means that we're going to be reading the value. But in our case, we want to change it dynamically. So I'll right-click on the property node, change all to right, and now we see that the arrow is going into it, and I can wire a value into this maximum. So if I want to, for instance, change this to 20, I can come along here, right-click, create a constant going in, run it, because again, programmatic, and then go back here to the front panel, and yes, indeed, I can go up to 20, but not beyond. Put it in 88 again, and it coerces it down to 20. That's what I want. So what we've just done is programmatically change it with a property node, and we also, of course, did it first in edit mode, statically. So what's the real value of doing it on the fly? What do we gain out of that? Who can think of a use case where we want to change properties dynamically of an object? Yeah.
Oh, well, if we had a device which only took a certain range of values, we may want to restrict the user input to just that range, and this looks like it would let us do that pretty easily.
You are reading my mind. That's fantastic. Good job.
Thanks.
All right, well, let's do that, right? So let's pretend that we have some sort of isolation that we can incorporate into a circuit, right? So I flip on the switch, and that flips some relays, and we have now isolation in the circuit, and I can put in a certain amount of voltage, right? But if I take that isolation off, then we have an unisolated circuit and can't take as much voltage, right? So I'm just going to put down from my Boolean subpalette a vertical toggle switch, which I'll call isolation. And I'll go to the terminal here on the block diagram. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a decision, really quick and easy decision about, or looking at this Boolean to see whether it's been pressed or not. And we can just use our select function right here. So I'll wire this isolation into the select function, and then I will have two values, and that corresponds to whether isolation has or has not been incorporated. So let's say that if isolation has been incorporated, I can enter in 100 volts into my circuit. If not, 10. And then the output of the select function will be wired into my property node. And now, to make this run continuously so that I can change it more than just once during the operation, what do I need to do to this VI? Yes?
Could we use a while loop?
We can use a while loop, exactly. Good thinking. So I'll go to Structures, While Loop, and I just click and drag around that bit of code. And of course, we want to be able to stop it, so I'll just right-click on the conditional terminal, create a control. There we go. We could put some timing in there as well. We'll just keep it simple for now. So I'll run this, and immediately when I run it, you see that isolation is false, so the value of 10 gets passed into there. Okay, and I can't go any higher than that. I can go lower, but not higher. But if I flip this switch and incorporate isolation, there we go. We go all the way up to 100. In fact, let's go put it in 111, and yes, indeed, it coerces it to the maximum 100. Turn off isolation. There we go, back to 10. Pretty cool, huh? Any questions on that? All right. We just looked at a very specific example of how to use a property node to edit this object in LabVIEW. Now let's zoom out and see what we've actually done. What has allowed us in LabVIEW to make this change? And what else can we do? All of this is possible because of VI Server. So what is VI Server? VI Server allows us to programmatically control VIs, objects in VIs, and LabVIEW in general on our machine or any machine to which we're networked. Now, in order to understand this, we need to have a little better understanding of what's called object-oriented programming. So, has anybody used object-oriented programming or OO before? Heard of it? Yep.
I think we did that while learning Java in college.
Okay, right. So, what are some terms you throw at me here? What's some object-oriented terms? What do you remember about it?
We talked about methods.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the data members of our classes.
All right, now we're talking. Okay, properties, methods, classes. Those are all some object-oriented concepts, and we're going to keep it really lightweight, don't worry. But it's really helpful to understand these in order for us to understand really what a property node is doing and then how else we can use it. So, some object-oriented concepts. And the first definition will be a class. A class is an object-oriented construct used as a template to create an object. All right? So as we see here, this class has certain definitions like properties and methods. So the class defines the properties and methods that an instance of the class would have. Property is an attribute or data about the object, and methods are functions that operate on the object's data. So that's kind of the formal definition. Now let's look at an example. For instance, maybe we have the class of person. And every instance of a single person would have certain properties and methods. So a specific person would have the property of height, eye color, and name. And they could also do some certain things, like work or eat. If we are now referring to a specific person, that would be an object. So in which case, we would have certain values in the property. So this person's height might be 6 feet. Their eye color may be blue. Their name may be Brian. And then this person could do things like work or eat, and we could have attributes even about how they work or eat. Maybe work quickly or eat a lot.
So,
Yes?
sorry. So the quickly, would that be a parameter that we would pass to the function work?
Yeah, it would be a parameter about the method. So the method is work, and then that parameter would have that method could have certain parameters about it.
Got it.
And we're going to be editing that in LabVIEW, but not on a person. What would we be editing? A LabVIEW object. Okay, so we just looked at some real-world example, person, but let's now bring it back to LabVIEW because that's what this course is about. And we're going to have a class numeric. So any numeric, even the one that we just dealt with earlier, has certain properties like left position, tip strip, and label. The methods it would have, reinitialize to default, get image. So if we had a specific instance of that numeric class, it would be this object. Okay, perhaps it has the left position of 121 pixels. Perhaps it has the tip strip value of circuit voltage and a label of voltage. And now we can do things to that numeric, like reinitialize it to default, or get the image and maybe with a blue background. All right, so we can kind of see now, we can kind of frame what we just did earlier, because that property node accessed the properties of the object. So what again was that property that we edited?
It was the maximum value that the numeric holds.
Exactly. So the maximum value or the data entry limit maximum. So that would be one of the properties about that numeric. And we were able to edit that value, that property value, with the property node. So as you can guess, maybe getting a little ahead of ourselves, there will be something else later that allows us to change the method, or rather invoke the method. And it's an invoke node. We'll see that later. So let's go back into LabVIEW, because what we just did, obviously, was use this property node to edit the properties of this object. But what if we want to access multiple properties in the same object? Pretty easy. I can go back here, just hover over the bottom of the property node, so I get that double-sided arrow, click and drag down, and now this exposes another property I can use. So, what do you think? What's something that we may want to change here? Jasmine.
Well, it says minimum, so maybe we want to set a lower limit as well?
Sure, we'll set a lower limit. All right, let's go ahead and just put a value in here. If the isolation is incorporated, I'll just hold down Control, click and drag on that select function to make a copy of it. Don't want LabVIEW to auto wire that, no thanks. Wire that same isolation boolean into there, and once again, put some values in. So I'll just grab these values, Control, drag down. In fact, we'll make a little bit of extra room. Little LabVIEW trick. Hold down Control, click and drag, create some space for me. Move this down. There's a broken wire here. Anybody remember how I get rid of that?
Oh,
Jason?
Control B.
Control B. You're a bright student. And then wire this in here. Whoops. Control Z will undo that. There we go. So if the isolation is on, let's just say the minimum is 5. If it's off, we'll say it's 0. And wire this in. There we go. I'll run it again. So while we're off, we can't go above 10, or rather while the isolation is off, can't go above 10, and we can't go below 0. Flip that isolation on, and we can't go below 5, and we can't go above 100. Now, can anybody see what's happening when I type in something that's below 5? What happens there? I can't go below 5, click, 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 but I can go and type something below 5. Enter it in. Anybody have an idea why that happened?
Do we have to tell LabVIEW to automatically enforce those boundaries if we type something different?
Very close. You're on the right path. Let's actually jump back into those properties that we looked at before on that object. And we see that, again, of course, here's that 5 for the minimum that I just made and the maximum of 100. But look at this response to value outside limits. It's different between the two. I have for the minimum, ignore, for the maximum, coerce. So the response to a value outside of a limit, like if I put a 0 in there or a 4, would be to ignore. Instead, I'll change it to coerce. If I run it now, can't go below there, and it will coerce it back to 5 if I put in a value less than that. And you can bet that that was a property that I edited there in edit mode. I can also do it with a property node if I wanted to.